Texas, 1944. The war had taken everything from her, her mother, her home, even the taste of real food. So, when a young German woman named Elsa Reiner was marched into an American POW camp, she expected cruelty. She expected hard bread, cold stares, and the constant echo of orders. What she never expected was to be handed something soft, something warm, something sweet. A sandwich, strange and unfamiliar, filled with a paste she had never tasted before. She took one bite and froze. Because in that moment, the flavor did something the war never could. It made her remember. The heat hit her first. Texas heat, not the kind that brushed your skin, but the kind that crawled into your throat and stayed there. Elsa Reiner stepped off the transport truck with her shoulders squared, her lips pressed shut, and her heart buried under layers of practiced silence. She was 22, but the war had aged her. Her once blonde hair was now the color of sand and ash, tied into a limp braid that stuck to the back of her neck. Around her, other German women moved slowly, blinking under the sun, their uniforms wrinkled and dull. Camp Marigold didn't look like a prison. No screaming guards, no dogs, no wire fences topped with knives. Just long wooden buildings, wide open sky, and a quiet too strange to trust. An American soldier stood with a clipboard, his helmet tilted back, squinting as he called out names with a drawl so thick it barely sounded like English. Elsa kept her eyes down, answering only when asked. She'd been trained not to show fear, not to show weakness. But this wasn't what she expected. Back home, Allied camps were spoken of with dread places of punishment, starvation, and shame. Yet here, someone offered her water, real water, cold, clean, in a tin cup. She drank it slowly, not because she was cautious, but because she didn't want it to end. Inside the barracks, the beds were lined in neat rows, cots, not straw, thin mattresses, but mattresses all the same. There was no shouting, no name-calling, just routine, order. She was given a blanket, then a schedule, then a meal, beans, cornbread. A spoonful of something sweet. Was it fruit? She didn't know. It had been years since she'd eaten without ration lines or fear of bomb sirens. That night, as the women settled into their bunks, someone whispered a prayer. Elsa didn't join in. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the cicadas outside, wondering how this place could feel so wrong, precisely because it wasn't cruel. The war had taught her how to endure pain, how to expect it, how to survive on bitterness, but it had not prepared her for kindness, and that, more than anything, kept her awake. The morning began with silence. No whistles, no barked orders, just the soft creak of bunk beds and the clinking of tin cups as women stirred from restless sleep. Elsa sat upright, her braids stiff from dust, her body sore in places she didn't want to name. Outside, the Texas sky was already turning a pale gold, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something sweet, almost like honey, but burnt. She dressed slowly, mechanically, pulling on the same wrinkled uniform she'd worn for weeks. Her boots felt too loose now. She'd lost weight. Like most of them, hunger had become a second skin. And yet, when she stepped outside, what met her wasn't the usual slap of discipline, but the low murmur of routine. Women were sweeping porches. A few were carrying buckets. An American guard leaned against a post, eating a biscuit and watching the camp without much interest. He didn't even raise his voice. Elsa kept her eyes forward and moved toward the mess hall. The line was orderly, not policed. She stood behind a woman from Leipzig and ahead of one who never spoke at all. Inside, the smell of food was overwhelming. Beans again, but warm. Bread. Coffee. Elsa blinked at the tray handed to her. It looked edible. Not just edible, generous. She sat at a long wooden table and watched the others as they ate. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. But there was chewing, swallowing, nodding. A kind of peace no one had asked for but dared not question. She tasted the beans first, soft, salty, seasoned. Then the bread, slightly sweet, like it had been made with care. There was even a small square of something yellow beside the bread. Butter, real butter. She stared at it. Her hands shook. Back in Dresden, butter had vanished with the first firebombs. Her mother used to cut it into slivers, hiding it like a treasure beneath a slice of black bread. Here, it was given to her like it meant nothing, like it was normal. Across the table, an American kitchen worker, maybe no older than her, refilled water pitchers without looking anyone in the eye. When he passed Elsa, he paused just long enough for their eyes to meet. No malice, no pity, just a glance. Elsa lowered her head quickly, ashamed for reasons she couldn't explain. After breakfast, they were assigned tasks. Elsa was sent to the kitchen building, where she scrubbed trays and sorted spoons. No shouting, no punishment, just the smell of cinnamon and coffee lingering in the air, making her dizzy. She didn't speak all day, but her mind raced. This wasn't the war she'd been warned about. This wasn't how enemies were supposed to be treated. And somewhere deep in her chest, a dangerous thought began to grow. Not trust, not hope, but confusion. And confusion, in a place like this, could be even more dangerous than fear. It was during the second week that Elsa began to notice the smallest things. The way the light filtered through the slats in the barracks wall each morning, casting soft golden lines across her blanket. The way the American guards smoked in silence, watching the prisoners without hatred, just duty. And the way the food arrived at the same hour, every day, without fail. No screaming, no chaos, just trays and steam, and a scent she could not name but somehow trusted. That morning, they served cornbread again, warm, slightly crumbly, golden as the sky. Elsa took one cautious bite and paused. It was sweet, not too much, just enough to shock her taste buds back to life. There was butter, too, melting into the cracks like memory. She looked around. The others were eating, slower than the Americans would, chewing like they were waiting for someone to snatch the food away. But it never happened. The bread remained. The meal continued. No one was punished for eating too fast. No one yelled. Elsa finished every crumb. After breakfast, her assignment took her to the laundry station. It was just behind the kitchen, a concrete room where steam rose from galvanized tubs and wet fabric clung to their arms like ghosts. She worked beside a girl from Hamburg who hummed old lullabies without realizing it. The sound unsettled Elsa. It reminded her of their house in Dresden, the way her mother used to sing as she brushed Elsa's hair. But that song had died in rubble. That voice had choked on smoke. And now, here in a camp built by enemies, the memory returned not as pain, but as something stranger, like a hand reaching for her in the dark. When the lunch bell rang, the same soldier brought the trays. He had freckles and eyes too kind for war. As he passed her, he said nothing, but there was a second sandwich on her tray. The same as before, soft white bread, slightly sticky inside, wrapped in wax paper. Elsa peeled it open slowly. A tangent-colored paste filled the center. She raised it to her nose, sniffed. It was nutty, foreign. She had never seen it before. The smell was strong, not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Around her, no one else had it. She hesitated. Her lips touched the bread, then her teeth sank in. The flavor was thick, salty, rich. It clung to her tongue like syrup and clay. She chewed, slower. The taste was overwhelming, not just in texture, but in meaning. She couldn't place it, couldn't explain why it made her hands tremble. She swallowed, but her throat stayed tight. Her breath came shallow. Something inside her chest, some door she'd kept locked, clicked open. And just like that, she froze. The war wasn't supposed to taste like this. The kitchen air was warm with steam and the metallic tang of boiling pots, but Elsa barely noticed. She stood still, the half-eaten sandwich in her hand, her jaw locked in mid-chew. Around her, the other prisoners scraped trays and stacked plates, their movements slow and methodical. No one seemed to notice that she wasn't moving. The taste lingered in her mouth, thick, dry, with a strange, oily sweetness. It clung to her tongue, like memory. Peanut butter. That's what one of the guards had called it. She'd never heard the word before, not back in Dresden, not even in Berlin, when supplies still came from the West. It wasn't German. It wasn't anything she could associate with home. And yet the flavor unlocked something so deeply buried that it didn't feel like food, it felt like a ghost. She took another slow bite, smaller this time. The paste filled her mouth again, and she felt it rising an ache, not in her stomach, but in her chest. Her hands trembled as she lowered the sandwich back onto the tray. The world blurred around the edges. She wasn't in Texas anymore. The clatter of trays faded. The heat of the kitchen melted into a colder, crisper memory. She was 6 years old again, standing beside her brother at the winter market. Her gloved hands held a paper cone of roasted chestnuts. The scent had been warm and earthy, like smoke and sweetness. Her brother had wiped his sticky fingers on her coat, laughing. Their mother had scolded him gently, then handed Elsa a sliver of bread spread with hazelnut cream, one of the last before the shortages came. The memory hit like shrapnel, sharp, then dull, then aching. She remembered the colors, the red scarf her mother wore, the yellow boots on the vendor's stall, the black specks of soot that floated down even on clear days. She remembered the sirens starting days later, the windows rattling, the smell of fire. And now, here she was, halfway around the world, tasting something that didn't exist in her childhood, but still felt like it belonged to it. Peanut butter, a stranger's food, an enemy's flavor. And yet it stirred her in a way that German rations never had. A sudden pressure behind her eyes made her blink. She hadn't cried in years. Not when the house collapsed, not when she buried her mother's ring in the rubble. But now, in a quiet American kitchen, eating a sandwich made by someone she'd never spoken to, her throat tightened and her eyes stung. She quickly turned away, wiping her cheek with her sleeve. She didn't want anyone to see. Didn't want to admit that the war was no longer just something outside of her, it was inside her, and all it took was a bite to bring it back. She sat alone behind the mess hall, knees drawn up, the wax paper still clutched in her hand. The sandwich was gone now, finished, devoured, swallowed like a secret. But the taste remained, heavy on her tongue and heavier in her chest. Elsa stared at the ground, where a single ant dragged a breadcrumb toward a crack in the stone. Everything around her was still the breeze, the distant shouts from the guards' barracks, the slow whine of cicadas in the trees. But inside her, something was shifting. She felt like she had just been handed a piece of something forbidden, not because it was American, but because it was warm, because it had comfort in it, because it had no business reaching her the way it did. That bite, just one, had broken through the cold wall she'd built around her. It had taken less than a minute to remind her of everything she had trained herself to forget. The hunger of childhood, the softness of family, the sound of her mother's voice, and most dangerously, the idea that comfort might still exist in the world, that someone might give it freely, even to a prisoner. She could not understand why it hurt so much. She had lost people, cities, years, but none of that made her feel small the way this sandwich had. No shellfire had ever made her cry. No command ever made her falter. But this strange, sticky food from a land she had been raised to hate had undone her. Her fingers gripped the empty wax paper tighter. She wanted to throw it, crush it, bury it under the dry earth. But she didn't. Instead, she folded it slowly and placed it in her pocket, like a letter she hadn't read yet. From somewhere behind her, footsteps approached, slow, cautious. She didn't turn until she heard the voice. "It's strange, huh?" It was the young American kitchen worker again, the one with freckles and sleeves rolled past his elbows. He held a cup of water and knelt beside her, not too close. "Peanut butter," he said, smiling gently. "My mama used to make sandwiches just like that when I was a kid. We didn't have much, but that stuff stuck to your ribs." Elsa looked at him, unsure what to say, unsure if she was allowed to say anything. He didn't push, just placed the cup beside her and stood up again. "Tastes like home," he said softly, more to himself than to her. She watched him walk away, his boots kicking up dust with each step. She stared at the water, then back at the folded wax paper in her pocket. Her heart ached not from hunger, not from sorrow, but from a feeling she hadn't had in years. Not guilt, not fear. Something quieter, like the first warmth of sun on frozen skin. She didn't know the word for it, but she knew it was dangerous. That night, Elsa could not sleep. The barracks were quiet except for the slow, rhythmic breathing of the women around her. Some snored softly, some shifted beneath their thin blankets, but none of them spoke. Sleep had become a kind of surrender, one she had trained herself to resist, especially in unfamiliar places. But tonight, it wasn't fear that kept her awake. It was taste. That stubborn, strange taste still clung to her memory like a song she couldn't stop humming. Peanut butter. Even the name sounded odd, like a child's invention. But it had broken something open inside her, and now the past came rushing in like water through a cracked dam. She lay on her back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, but what she saw wasn't the camp. It was Dresden. Snow falling on rooftops, her father walking home from work, his shoulders dusted with white, her mother stirring soup on the stove, her little brother trailing behind her, always barefoot, always grinning. And on one rare afternoon, a market vendor offering them a sliver of hazelnut cream spread thin across crusty bread. Her brother had licked it clean and smacked his lips like it was the richest thing in the world. That taste had vanished long before the bombs came. And when they did, they erased more than buildings. They erased memory. They rewired the brain to survive, not to remember. But here, in this strange American place, the flavor of something entirely foreign had unlocked the door. It was like finding an old photograph in a burned house. Familiar, painful, precious. She turned on her side and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Beside her, a girl named Clara whispered something in her sleep, a name, maybe, or a prayer. Elsa closed her eyes, trying to block it out, but her chest felt tight. Her throat ached, not from illness, but from something worse, the urge to speak. She wanted to say her brother's name out loud. She wanted to whisper her mother's lullaby, the one that used to lull her to sleep before the sirens began. But silence had kept her alive this long. Silence had been her uniform, her shield, and now, because of a sandwich, it was cracking. Somewhere outside, an owl called into the night. A wind moved gently through the trees, rustling the branches like pages of a forgotten book. Elsa lay still, eyes closed, trying to push the memories away. But it was too late. The flavor had pulled them back. The war had taken her home, her people, her voice. But the peanut butter had done something she hadn't expected. It had given her back the one thing she thought she'd lost forever. Hunger, not for food, but for memory, for something human. And that, more than anything, terrified her. The next morning arrived without warning. No trumpet, no order. Just sunlight spilling through the slats above her bunk and the faint clang of trays in the distance. Elsa sat up slowly, her limbs heavy with exhaustion. She hadn't slept more than a few minutes, but the weight in her chest wasn't from fatigue. It was something deeper, something she didn't have a name for. She washed her face in the basin just outside the barracks, letting the cold water jolt her back into the present. The sky was a wide, open blue, the kind that didn't exist in Germany anymore. Not since the smoke, not since the fire. Inside the mess hall, the line was already forming. She joined it without thinking, eyes low, mouth shut. But when she reached the front, she hesitated. There it was again, wrapped in wax paper, warm from the kitchen, another peanut butter sandwich, a second one. She hadn't asked for it, no one else had one. The same kitchen worker, Freckles, rolled sleeves, always quiet, placed it on her tray without comment. Their eyes met for only a second, but it was enough. Elsa carried the tray to the corner table, the same one she always chose, farthest from the windows. She sat down slowly, staring at the sandwich. She didn't touch it, not yet. She ate the beans first, then the bread, then drank the thin coffee. And all the while, the sandwich sat there, untouched, glowing like a message she didn't want to read. Finally, she picked it up. Her hands were steadier than yesterday, her breathing slower. She took a bite smaller this time, prepared for the taste. And yet it still hit her, still thickened the air around her, still pulled her into memory. But this time, something was different. She stayed present. The cafeteria didn't dissolve. Her vision didn't tunnel. She chewed slowly, eyes open, and listened. The clatter of metal, the scrape of benches, the soft murmur of women speaking in half whispers. She looked up and saw the guard by the door, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, not watching her, just watching. For the first time, she wondered if maybe the Americans were confused too. Maybe they didn't understand why giving her something sweet would hurt more than punishment. Or maybe they did. Maybe that was the point. A quiet kind of mercy, the kind that doesn't demand thanks. She finished the sandwich and folded the wax paper again, slipping it into her pocket like before. Not because she needed it, but because it was proof that something strange had happened here. Something that didn't make sense in a world built on hatred. And though she wouldn't admit it out loud, she knew this. The war had taken her family, her country, her language of comfort. But now, Bit by bit, it was giving her back her ability to feel, and feeling she was beginning to remember was dangerous, but it was also how you stayed human. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the yard as Elsa scrubbed trays behind the kitchen. The scalding water didn't bother her. She welcomed the sting, it kept her grounded. Her hands moved with practiced rhythm, but her mind drifted. She had stopped trying to block the memories now. They came in waves, sharp and clear, rising and falling like a tide she no longer feared. The peanut butter had changed something, not just in her memory, but in her body. She noticed things now, how the American guards sometimes shared cigarettes with each other, how they didn't flinch when women walked past, how they spoke in soft voices when they thought no one was listening. This place was not home, but it wasn't the enemy either, not exactly. When the work ended, Elsa stepped outside, wiping her hands on her skirt. The sky had turned the color of steel wool, streaked with burnt orange. She stood there for a moment, watching the horizon, when a voice cut through the quiet. Hey, it was him again, the freckled kitchen worker. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a half-eaten apple in his hand. She didn't move. He didn't either. "You like it?" he asked, nodding toward the kitchen, as if the sandwich still hovered between them. Elsa didn't answer. Her English was good enough, but she wasn't sure she trusted it here. Still, something in his tone wasn't mocking. He was just asking. She nodded, once, then added softly, "Strange, but good." He smiled, not wide, but real. "It's from Georgia. Grew up on the stuff." His voice was gentle, laced with something that didn't match the uniform he wore. He looked at her, not like a prisoner, not like a threat, just like a person. She didn't know what to do with that. A gust of wind swept through the yard, stirring the dust. Elsa turned to go, unsure what else to say, but before she stepped away, he spoke again. "My name's Robert." She paused. That small gesture, his name hung in the air like a question. She turned back, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elsa." It was the first time she had said her own name aloud since arriving. It felt like opening a door she hadn't touched in years. She walked back to the barracks slowly, the air cooler now, the light fading. Her steps felt different, like something had shifted in her spine, in her chest. She had spoken. She had been seen. And for a moment, however brief, the war hadn't existed. There had been only a boy with freckles and a sandwich that didn't belong to her past, but somehow still reached it. And though she didn't yet understand why, she knew this much. Something had begun, even in this place built for endings. In the quiet that followed lights out, Elsa lay on her cot with her hands folded over her chest and the folded wax paper tucked beneath her pillow. She didn't know why she kept it. It wasn't beautiful or rare. It smelled faintly of peanuts and bread. But it held something she couldn't name. Proof, maybe. Proof that softness could still exist in a world trained to be hard. Around her, the women breathed in rhythm. A few whispered prayers. One woman near the door hummed softly, the melody barely audible over the low buzz of insects outside. Elsa stared at the wooden beams above her. Her name still echoed in her mind. Elsa, she had said it. She had given it away. And now it felt like a thread had been tugged loose in the fabric she had spent years stitching tight. The next morning, she returned to the kitchen. No one assigned her. She just went. The guards didn't stop her, and the kitchen workers nodded as if they expected her now. She took her place near the sinks, scrubbing pans from the breakfast rush. There was comfort in the repetition. The clink of spoons, the hiss of water, the scrape of metal against metal. And then there was Robert. He didn't speak much that day, just handed her a towel when hers slipped to the floor, poured her water when the heat became too much, and when the midday meal came, he placed a sandwich beside her tray with a soft nod. She didn't say thank you. He didn't expect her to. She ate alone again, on the bench behind the mess hall. This time, the sandwich didn't make her freeze. It didn't unlock a flood of memories. Instead, it made her pause, made her feel. The peanut butter stuck to the roof of her mouth, and she had to sip water between bites. But there was comfort in it now, familiarity, like a song she had learned the rhythm to. She wondered if it was like that for him too, if he saw her not as an enemy, but as a girl with trembling hands and a name that meant nothing here. Later that afternoon, Elsa was back in the laundry room, steam curling around her face as she wrung out heavy towels. Across from her, Clara spoke for the first time in days. "Do you ever miss the taste of real bread?" she asked. Elsa didn't answer right away. She thought about the dense rye loaves her mother used to bake, about the butter melting on warm slices, about the laughter around the table before the war pulled them all apart. Then she looked at the towel in her hands and shook her head. "I miss what it meant," she said quietly. Clara nodded. They worked in silence after that. It wasn't the peanut butter itself that haunted Elsa. It was what came with it, the silence, the kindness, the fact that no one had demanded anything in return. And that, more than hunger, was what she was learning to live with. By the third week, the routine no longer felt foreign. Elsa woke before the sun rose, not because she had to, but because something in her chest stirred with the light. She folded her blanket, straightened her bunk, and stepped into the pale morning like it belonged to her. The air was cooler now, touched by the coming autumn. Dew clung to the grass, and the dirt paths that once felt like borders now felt like threads tying 1 hour to the next. She still didn't speak much, but silence had stopped feeling like a weapon. It was just quiet now, and inside that quiet, she noticed things she never had before. The way the guards let the younger prisoners rest longer during dish duty, the way Clara shared her last slice of apple without a word, the way Robert always placed her sandwich slightly off-center on her tray, as if he wanted her to notice but not mention it. She had grown used to the peanut butter. It still stuck to her teeth and clogged her throat when she chewed too fast, but the flavor no longer startled her. It comforted her. She didn't know why something so strange could become familiar so quickly. Maybe it was because it came without cruelty. Maybe because it came without warning. Or maybe, deep down, she had always been starving for something like this, not food, but something offered freely, without suspicion, without control. A gesture, not a transaction. That morning, she watched as a new group of women arrived. They looked like ghosts, thin, wide-eyed, shaking in the knees from the long journey. Elsa remembered that first day, the way the sun felt like a spotlight, the way the guard's silence seemed like a trick. One girl, younger than the rest, had a limp and carried no bag. Her eyes darted across the camp like a bird in a room with no exit. Elsa approached slowly, carefully. The girl flinched when she stepped near. Elsa said nothing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the extra sandwich Robert had handed her that morning, still wrapped, still warm. She held it out with both hands. The girl stared at it, unsure. Elsa didn't explain. She simply waited. After a few seconds, the girl took it, her fingers brushing Elsa's just long enough to tremble. She didn't thank her. She just sat down on the nearest bench and held the sandwich in her lap like it was made of gold. Elsa stepped back and watched. When the girl finally took a bite, her jaw stopped mid-chew, her eyes frozen wide, the way Elsa's had. Elsa knew that look. That moment when something soft slices through all the hardness and hits you where your armor thinned without your knowing. She didn't need to say a word. She had already lived the silence. Now she knew how to hand it gently to someone else. The leaves began to fall. Not many, just a few, drifting lazily from the trees that lined the outer fence of the camp. They weren't the bold reds and golds Elsa remembered from home. These were smaller, drier, brittle from the Sunday. Still, they marked time, and time had started to matter again. Days were no longer just spaces to survive. They had shape now, rhythm, even color. On a Tuesday morning, Robert handed her a folded napkin along with the usual sandwich. She didn't unfold it until she reached the back steps of the mess hall, her usual spot where the sun hit just enough to keep her warm without blinding her. Inside the napkin was something small and round, a cookie, cracked at the edge, golden brown, still slightly warm. Elsa stared at it. It felt absurd, unnecessary, beautiful. She bit into it slowly, almost cautiously. It crumbled against her tongue with the softness of something made without fear. Butter, sugar, maybe cinnamon. It melted quickly, leaving behind a sweetness that caught her completely off guard. She finished it in 3 small bites, each one more unbelievable than the last. For a long time, she didn't move. She just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, staring out at the dusty yard. The wind stirred a few fallen leaves. Somewhere, a screen door creaked open and shut. Back in the barracks that night, she reached for her letter, the one she never planned to send. It was a scrap of old lined paper she had kept folded in her underclothes. No envelope, no address, just ink and memory. She wrote to her father, though she didn't know if he was alive. "We are treated with more dignity than I expected," she wrote. "Today, I ate something called a peanut butter sandwich. It tasted like confusion at first, then something close to comfort. And this morning, a cookie." She paused, the pencil hovering above the page. "I cried after the cookie, just a little. It reminded me of you, of home, before the fear came." She stopped writing. There was more to say, but no words for it. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it back where it belonged. Later, as the women settled in for the night, Clara asked her what it was like. "The cookie?" she whispered. Elsa nodded. "Soft," she said. "It tasted like nothing we ever had, but it reminded me of everything we lost." Clara didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence that followed was heavier than any conversation. Elsa lay awake, staring into the dark. That tiny cookie, baked by someone she might never meet, had shattered something inside her. Not in a painful way, in a necessary one. For the first time since the war began, she allowed herself to long for something more than survival. She wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a risk, but she knew it was real. And in this place, that was enough. The rain came suddenly. Not a storm, just a soft, steady drizzle that blanketed the camp in silence. Most of the women stayed indoors, grateful for the break from sun and sweat. Elsa stood beneath the awning outside the kitchen, arms crossed, watching the droplets gather in the dirt. The smell of wet earth filled the air, and for a moment she could almost pretend she was back in Germany, standing on her childhood porch, listening to her mother hum as she hung laundry. But there were no clotheslines here, only the rusted wire fences and the rhythmic plink of water dripping from the roof. Robert passed by without a word, heading inside with a sack of flour slung over one shoulder. She watched him, not out of curiosity, but because his presence had become part of her day, like the bell or the bread. She didn't speak, neither did he, but the space between them no longer felt empty. That afternoon, they were assigned to shell peas, a dull, repetitive task made bearable only by the warm kitchen and the hum of the radio in the corner. Someone on the American side had tuned it to a slow, melancholy song, English lyrics, that Elsa couldn't follow but somehow understood. The notes curled in the air like smoke, winding their way through the silence between prisoners and workers alike. She sat beside Clara, their hands moving automatically as the green pods snapped open, the peas rolling into bowls like tiny marbles. "Do you think the war will end soon?" Clara asked, not looking up. Elsa didn't answer at first. She thought of the cookie, the sandwiches, the silent kindness of the kitchen boy. Then, finally, she said, "It already feels different." Clara nodded slowly, like she understood. When the work was done, Elsa stepped back out into the drizzle. The rain had soaked the edges of the sky, turning the horizon into a pale blur. She walked toward the fence, not close, but close enough to see the trees beyond it. They swayed gently, their leaves dripping, bending. The world beyond the camp didn't look so far away anymore. She thought about the letter again, about her father's handwriting, about the market square with its bread stalls and chestnut carts. She hadn't let herself miss it. Not until now. Now she missed everything. And that, strangely, made her feel alive. She reached into her pocket and touched the wax paper, still folded, still faintly stained. She held it tight and closed her eyes. The rain touched her face. She didn't wipe it away. She let it fall. Years later, in a quiet village nestled between Bavarian hills, Elsa stood in her modest kitchen as the morning sun poured through the window. The war was long over. The uniform had been traded for cotton skirts and quiet days. Her hair was streaked with silver now, but the braid remained tighter, neater, a ritual she never abandoned. The scent of baking filled the house. Flour dusted the wooden counter, and her hands, still steady after all these years, shaped dough with the same patience she once gave to peeling potatoes in a Texas camp kitchen. Her grandchildren played outside, chasing chickens through the damp grass. She could hear their laughter, high and bright, echoing across the yard. On the counter beside her sat a tin of cookies, warm and golden brown, their edges cracked, their centers soft. Peanut butter, the American kind, imported now, but familiar, almost beloved. She had spent years perfecting the recipe, not to make it exact, but to make it hers. She took one in her hand and sat by the window. The trees outside swayed gently in the autumn breeze. A leaf floated past, and for a moment the world grew quiet. She took a bite. It melted the way it always had, soft, sweet, impossible to define. But the ache it once carried was gone. It no longer dragged her backward. It rested, now, like a folded photograph kept in the back of a drawer, still there, still sacred, but no longer sharp. Her youngest granddaughter tiptoed inside, drawn by the smell. "Oma, can I have one?" the girl asked, eyes wide. Elsa smiled and handed her the cookie. The girl took a bite, and crumbs scattered across her chin. "It's sweet," she said. "What's it made of?" Elsa paused, then said simply, "Memory." The girl blinked, confused, and skipped off with the rest of the cookie in her hand. Elsa looked down at her own hands, wrinkled now, but still strong. She thought of Robert. She had never seen him again. She never even knew his last name. But the look in his eyes when he handed her that first sandwich had never left her, not because he pitied her, but because, somehow, he had seen her. Not as a prisoner, not as a German, just a person. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered his name into the quiet room. No one heard it, but that was enough. Some wars end with surrender, others with silence. But for Elsa, the war ended with a bite, a flavor she had no word for at the time, a gift that asked for nothing. And in the end, it wasn't the pain she remembered most. It was the kindness and the cookie. If stories like this moved you, make sure to subscribe. There are more forgotten moments like this waiting to be told.